Hey everyone, it is Tony. I am back with another super exciting episode of Women In, and I can't wait for you to meet my next guest. Before you meet my guest, let me tell you what you're listening to. Women In is a podcast that celebrates women from all walks of life and the people who uplift them. Each episode features incredible voices from my world, sharing stories that spark inspiration, challenge the status quo, and remind us that empowering women empowers everyone. This is a bold, curious, and uncensored space where disruption is welcome, forward thinking is encouraged, and change is the goal. I'm passionate about breaking down barriers, not just for us, but for the next generation. Whether our paths cross professionally or personally, these conversations matter. Let's dive in and celebrate the power of connection, growth, and the people who are shaping our world. And this gentleman is definitely shaping our world. Martin Lockett is the Director of Cultural Engagement at Lines for Life, a substance abuse counselor, author, public speaker, and advocate for reducing DUI fatalities. He spent 17 and a half years in prison for a DUI fatality that claimed 2 lives and severely injured another. In an impassioned vow to his victims' families and friends at his sentencing, Lockett devoted the rest of his life to honoring his victims' legacies by helping others who struggle with substance abuse issues and warning of the dangers of drinking and driving. While incarcerated, Martin earned a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology, or Sociology, and a Master's of Science in Psychology, and served as a mentor and role model for other inmates. He acquired state certification as a substance abuse counselor, published 2 books, Prison to Purpose Pipeline and My Prison Life, and began sharing his story at DUI victim impact panels, all within the prison setting. Now released, Lockett continues his mission and message by helping those in need of counseling services for mental health and substance abuse issues, while providing hope by sharing his powerful story of redemption at DUI victim impact panels, alcohol highway safety classes, high schools, colleges, and conferences across the country. Hey, Martin.
Hi, thank you so much for that. I hear introductions of myself in that way, and I'm like, wow, okay, they are talking about me. This is true. It's an absolute honor to be here, and really looking forward to a very a great conversation.
Oh, me too. We were talking before I hit record. I'm like, I got to save some oxygen in these lungs because I was just really looking forward to this interview for a lot of reasons, which you and I talked about a little bit. But before we dive into all that, tell everyone how you and I got connected.
Yeah, we got connected through a great friend of mine and yours, Peggy. And I met Peggy, I follow a bunch of sober influencers, recovery-oriented folks on Instagram. And I had met Peggy, I want to say a couple years ago. She had reached out to me, her and her podcast co-host had reached out to me on Instagram and had me on their podcast. And so we kind of stayed in touch every so many months. We'll catch up. And she asked me if I would, first she said to Google Tony Will, and I was like blown away when I did. And she's like, yeah, she has an awesome podcast. And so here we are.
And that's it. Peggy Cooney, she was also a guest on Women In. It's probably been about a year now, and she's just phenomenal in the sober space with Zero Proof Experiences, and then the conference Sober in the City, which I speak at almost every conference in some way, shape, or form. They can't get rid of me, Martin. So I'm just so glad we're connected. So the minute she told me, she texted me, she's like, Google Martin Lockett. I'm like, okay. So I Googled you, and then I was like, wow. Right away, I was captured by your story. And then I saw you had a book. So I was like, anyone that knows me knows that I'm getting the book. So I bought the book and I read it. I was telling Martin off air that I read it in like 4 days. And the synopsis is Prison to Purpose Life is about your upbringing, how you ended up in jail for 17 and a half years, and the whole story around that. It was so powerful. So and Martin and I are about the same age. We're only a year apart. So as I'm reading this book, it was not lost on me that what you were experiencing and what I was experiencing in my life, and just I don't there was just so much. I was so drawn to your story and just the courage to write about it. So I know I'm like giving this giant long-winded intro, but I want to talk about let's start with how you were able to make peace with writing about such a heavy topic and talking so openly about it and the victims' families. And it's a big question, but I'll kind of let you take it from there. I'm sure you're asked about it a lot, but yeah, start there.
Yeah, so I've done many a podcast, and I will say that's the first time I've ever gotten that question. So
Oh,
thank you. um, so my amazing partner, I know we're going to talk about the amazing women in my life, and so
mhm.
I'll say so. My amazing partner was the one who, encouraged me to write the book, and I was already kind of on this new path in my life. I was incarcerated, but I was wanting more for my life and delving into my education, and she said, you should think about writing a book about your life. It could really help some people. And I'm thinking, like, I'm Martin Lockett from Portland, Oregon, in prison for the next, at that point, 15 years or whatever it was. Like, who's going to be interested in reading that story, right? I don't have a big platform. I'm not a, retired athlete or anything like that. And she said, well, no, that's exactly the point. Like, there's so many people who come from, nowhere USA, if you will, who are going through, many struggles, and they could identify with what you've gone through, and it gives them hope to see that doesn't have to be the rest of your life, right? You can make changes. And so I said, okay, well, let me think about it. And so, long story short, I decided to do it, but I had no idea where to start. So I was an avid reader in prison, and so I read a book on how to write your life story. That's literally the name of the book, How to Write Your Life Story. And it gave like 500 prompts to jog your memory. And it talked about like writing your book in short episodes to keep the reader engaged. It talked about having an outline, and within that outline, so know of like 4 or 5 different specific events you want to highlight in each chapter, and then you just free write. You don't edit, you don't think about it, you just free write. And then you go back and you say, with the understanding of what the plot, if you will, is about, or the overall message you want to leave your readers. Then whatever doesn't coincide with that, then you eliminate. That's how you make your edits. That's how you figure out what needs to be in this book and what doesn't need to be in this book. So I did that over the course of about 7.5 months. And as I was telling you prior to starting this, that I had to take breaks in between because I was processing, writing about these things 20 years later and processing them for the first time without alcohol. It was taxing, right? It was emotionally taxing. It was physically taxing. So, but it was so therapeutic and so cathartic, and so I embraced that process, and then came out with the 235-page book, I want to say. I can't remember, 235, 240, something like that, of my life up until 2010. Obviously, there's a lot that's happened since 2010, but that was really the crux of kind of the turning point in my life.
Yeah, it was. I mean, you were stealing cars. Y-
I
You
was.
you were. It wasn't just alcohol, right? There, weed. If I was there any other drugs that you talked about in there?
Well, so there was one. I think I mentioned one time I was hanging out with a bunch of guys. I was at an alternative school at this point. I'd
Hmm.
been kicked out of my high school for getting caught with weed. Go to this drug and alcohol based
Hmm.
alternative school, and some of the guys there had mushrooms, and I'm thinking,
Oh,
well,
that's right.
this is something new, and I did it, and I hated it, and would never touch mushrooms again. But again, just being that kid who was willing to try anything, frankly. And I know we'll probably get into this, but just my lack of self-esteem, poor self-concept, no firm identity in who I was, left me at the mercy of pretty much anybody who would be willing to accept me and to hang out with me, and give me a sense of belonging. And so whatever they were into, I was into.
Yeah, you wrote about that pretty the detail you put in there because one of the things that stood out to me because we're the same age, was like when you would change your personal style, the clothes you were wearing, and you're like, okay, this is who I was showing up as, and then your friends would be like, who are, like, you know, you were uh, more, I don't know, they were the different styles. I wouldn't get into each one, but I would, that really speaks to what you're just talking about, that self-worth, like figuring out who the heck you are, and really you found out who you were in, because you were in jail twice.
Right. Yeah. So just so listeners can understand what you're talking about. So I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood in Portland. I know people think about Portland now and they think about, like, naked bike rides and, keep Portland weird and tree hugging, this and that. And I'm telling you, like, that may be true today in 2025. That was not true in the 80s.
Mhm.
It was the height of the crack epidemic. There were gangs coming up from California fighting for territory. It was untapped land, if you will, in Portland, Oregon. And so it was essentially a war zone. And although I had two very loving parents in the household, dad worked to support our family, mom stayed home to take care of us kids. We were a family of six. And so I had a pretty fairly normal childhood at that time. And when I got to high school, things drastically changed for me and rapidly changed for me, because at this point we know that adolescence, between the ages of they say 14 and 19, you go through a period of psychosocial development that is predicated on forming a healthy identity, right? And kids will naturally try on, they say, different identities to figure out, where they feel most comfortable, right? That might be changing your hairstyle, changing your appearance, the way you talk, your friend group, all these different things. And that's a healthy process when there are guardrails. There were no guardrails for me at that point because dad was working all day and my mom's health had severely deteriorated. And so we were left to the streets. My brother and I have a twin brother. And so because we grew up in a neighborhood where, there was a lot of, gang activity and gang violence. So we didn't have kind of the protection of that home environment growing up. We were in the streets, and that's when we started stealing cars and hanging out and, drinking and smoking and doing everything that kids shouldn't be doing. But that also created an identity. It was an unhealthy identity, but an identity nonetheless. And I was under the illusion, if you will, that as a black kid growing up in the hood, like, this is who you had to be, right? This you must be this, right? Otherwise, you're a sellout, right? So on one hand, I was that guy. Also, my parents, you know, had us working summer jobs when we were 14 years old to understand the value of a hard-earned dollar and all of these things. And so I had a job at a local ice cream parlor where I would work after school, and all of my coworkers were white. And I remember I would look at them as like the status symbol of success, and not just because they were white, but because they lived in middle class neighborhoods with manicured lawns and, nice vehicles in the driveway. And when they turned 16, their dad got them a little Acura they could drive to school. And
Mhm.
so all these things that I didn't have, certainly my peers didn't have. And so it really created this sense of inferiority around my blackness and my cultural identity and things like that. And so I said, well, I need to feel that I'm on their level. So I would hang out with my white coworkers after work, and I would literally bring a spare, change of clothes, which was like Tommy Hilfiger and Ralph Lauren polo, and like dress how they dress. And I would try to change my vernacular and pronounce my INGs and, speak differently to gain their acceptance, right? And so I'm literally navigating between two identities. And frankly, Tony, like, I didn't feel that I was truly authentic in either one, right? Because I wasn't raised, to be a gang member. Like, I had good family values and wholesome morals and all these things. Um, but those were the worlds that I was kind of vacillating between. And so it created this real internal conflict for me that I didn't know how to express, certainly didn't know how to process, make sense of. So that's why alcohol really became a strong crutch for me. And I always tell people when I'm speaking at high schools and things like that, I tell these young people that, alcohol was my best friend until it wasn't.
Mhm.
And so that's just kind of paying some context into what you were describing there.
Yeah, and you're able to take that, what you just did, and explain verbally and how you were writing. And hopefully, this next question is offensive. So now I got you on your toes because when I finished the book, I'm like, God, I wonder if he wrote it or a ghostwriter did. And I mean, that was you.
No, I wrote it. Yeah, I wrote. Now, I wrote it in my cell with a pen and paper, but I did have a professional editor
Yep.
edit it. So she formatted it beautifully. I told her, don't change like anything that's in quotes.
Yeah.
Don't change that because that's the way we talked back then. Those are my words. Obviously, she's a professional editor, so
Yep.
she, did her magic. But I did write all 92,000 words of that book.
Holy cow. Because I gotta ask him this and I asked because like I mentioned, my book's coming out in Q1, but I hired a ghostwriter. I do like to write. I don't have the time. And
I had a lot of time.
yeah, yeah, that's true. But you and I have something else in common. I'll talk here in a minute about. But yeah. So you are an excellent writer, and it's just I can tell like your love for learning and just how and you did have the time. But it doesn't matter. Like writing isn't like it's just natural for you. Anyways, that's how it read. So I just wanted to tell you that.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And, that's also a passion that I didn't know I had writing. When I was in high school, I think I talked about my love for artistry
Hmm.
I mean, that was everything. My mom was a phenomenal artist and she taught me very young how to draw. And I was very much a mama's boy. So, I loved hanging out with my mom and learning how to draw and having conversations. And even though I was very wayward throughout my high school years and skipped a lot of classes, that art class, I was in advanced art for 3 out of 4 years. I never skipped that class. Like that was my sanctuary. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. And when I went to prison, I still drew a little bit, but I really developed a love for writing when I started taking college courses and things like that. And then I parlayed that into becoming a regular blog. I wrote for a blog site called Inmates Matter Too back then, and so I would chronicle
Hmm.
just my day to day in prison. I really enjoyed just the art of writing, and so that was a passion that I developed while in prison.
Let's talk about prison and what led you there. So I'll let you, I mean, I obviously have read the book, so I'll let you talk about the story of what led you to the 17 and a half years in prison, because there's other things that happen in that time frame that I want to hit on as well. So I'll let you take it away with the DUI and what happened that night.
Sure. So this I'll just go right into the day that everything unfolded very tragically. It was New Year's Eve of 2003. I remember I was working at a warehouse at the time. I'm 24 years old. I went to work like I do every day, but I remember we had gotten off work early because of the holiday in particular. So that morning about 10:30, we're kind of just wrapping things up. And my boss had, I remember he casually joked with us. We were all young guys. And he said, I want you guys go out, have a good time, live your best life tonight, but please just do not end up on the front page of the newspaper. And of course, I didn't think anything of it. I laughed it off. I clocked out. I leave. I go straight to the liquor store. I bought a fifth of gin, headed over to my parents' house to hang out with my twin brother. And I drank the alcohol over the course of maybe 2 or 3 hours that early afternoon. And then my brother and I had made plans for later that night to attend a friend's house party, a guy that we had gone to high school with. And so after I drank that entire fifth of gin, most people I think would have been content for the rest of the day. I was not, because I had a ritual. Every day I would leave work and I would go to the corner store and buy 4 24-ounce cans of malt liquor, because that was my drug of choice, if you will. So I went to the store, bought 4 24-ounce cans of beer. I drank those between the hours of about 5 and 8 o'clock that evening. And then my brother and I decided that we would go to another friend's house in the meantime to hang out because, we didn't want to get to the party too early. So we get to that friend's house and the three of us hang out, kill some time. We drink a pint of Hennessy between us, and it's now about 11 o'clock. So we're leaving his apartment, and as we're walking out the door, and I think about this all these years later, I had warnings throughout the day that I totally ignored. So the first one was the boss. Here comes warning number 2. As we're leaving, his mother had yelled out from the kitchen, y'all be careful tonight. You hear? And of course, we replied, yes, ma'am. Of course, we'll be careful. Obviously, we had no intentions of being careful that night. So we get to the party. We see a bunch of old classmates and friends and associates, what have you. We celebrate. We drink more alcohol, of course. We bring in the new year. Everything is great. I knew that I was especially intoxicated, Tony, because I remember I was doing like this little strip tease for some of the young ladies who were there, and I was terribly shy until I had alcohol in my system. But I had never done anything like that in my life, and I was doing that and I got really shy, and I clammed up when they started putting dollars down my boxers, and I was like, oh, I can't do this. But I knew I was like so wasted in that moment, and so we leave the party. And I remember my brother had asked me, is it either my brother or my friend, and they asked me, they were like, hey, do you want one of us to drive? Now, admittedly, all 3 of us have been drinking, but I have been drinking the most. I mean, I started early, around noon. And I was like, no, I'm good. I got it. Because frankly, sadly, I drank and drove every single day for 19 straight months leading into this, what's going to happen in the next couple hours. So I drive, I take my friend home, no problem. I get back onto the freeway to take my brother home. And I remember I just felt so exhausted, and I had only eaten one meal at Popeyes. I had gotten about 4:30 that afternoon and been drinking all day, so I'm just exhausted. I want to go home, I want to go to sleep because I knew I didn't have to work the next day. So when I was on the freeway, I began to speed. I was going about 80 miles an hour, and my brother was like, hey man, like you should slow down. The police are out, especially it being a holiday. And I was like, that's a good point, right? Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So I went ahead and slowed down. We exited the freeway 10 or 15 minutes later. We're now driving in a residential area. And again, I began to pick up my speed to about 60 miles an hour. And, this makes my brother angry. And he's like, slow down before we crash, man. And I'm like, just calm down. Like, I know what I'm doing. I've got this. You're like, just don't worry about it. I'm fine. Okay, I know what I'm doing here. But just to appease him and keep him quiet, I went ahead and slowed down. And so we continued to drive for about 10 more minutes. And as I am about to get into the left-hand turning lane to drop him off at our parents' house, he suddenly realizes he's all out of cigarettes. So he's like, hey man, let's go up the road so I can get some cigarettes. I'm all out. And in my mind, I'm like, here's one more stop that I don't want to have to make. So we drive for a couple blocks. And then another 2 blocks from that point, there's this intersection. And the mini mart that we need to get to for the cigarettes is just beyond the intersection. And I remember I'm looking up at the light, and the light is yellow. And as intoxicated as I was, I knew there was no way I was going to make this light. But anybody who's ever driven intoxicated before off of alcohol knows that obviously you're not thinking clearly, you're not seeing things clearly. And I was always a much more aggressive driver when I was drunk. Like I had a lead foot, and like I went through stop signs and red lights. So in a split second, I made up my mind. I'm not gonna wait. Like I'm going right through. I want to get these stupid cigarettes and get him home and go to my house and go to sleep. So I immediately punched the gas, and it's like, and this is something that's very common for those who are intoxicated. You have this very tunnel vision, view. So I didn't see anything to the right or left of me as I'm speeding through this light, and literally within seconds, boom. I mean, just this earth-shattering crash. I knew I'd hit somebody clearly. My airbag deploys. My face lands into this soft cushion is what it felt like. My car came to a very slow winding halt, and I immediately looked to my right to, see if my brother's okay. And he's starting to move around a bit, so I'm immediately relieved that we're both alive, right? This is good. And I step out of my vehicle in that moment. And I mean, it's just so sad to say that, like, I didn't go check on the people that I just hit because I was so driven by superficial appearances and things that made me feel good. And so I was just only worried about my vehicle, my status symbol of success, right? So I'm walking around my car and I'm looking at my custom rims that are utterly destroyed. The entire front end is smashed inward, and I am devastated because I am now looking at my prized possession in just a heap of crumpled metal. Mm-hmm. And then my brother gets my attention, and he starts to point across the street where the other vehicle had spun about 60 or 70 feet before it stopped. And he's like, hey, man, he said, I think I see somebody lying down on the pavement over there, and it doesn't look like they're moving. So in that moment, I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? And I'm trying to process the magnitude of what I had just done. And of course, you really can't, because you're intoxicated. License sirens are everywhere in the distance. You hear them, they're rushing to the scene. And they get there, and obviously the first responders attend to the victims. The police officers are, they're interviewing me. They take my brother yards away to interview him. And about 5 minutes into that interview, that officer wasted no time to inform me that that person who was lying on the pavement had already been pronounced dead. Mm-hmm. He told me that another passenger was being transported by ambulance to the trauma center just blocks away. So obviously I'm taking full accountability. You know, he asked me how much had I drank that day and should I have been driving? And of course I'm like, no, I shouldn't have been driving. I'm totally responsible. Like, I can't believe I did this. I'm placed under arrest. Obviously, I'm put into the back of the cruiser. We head for downtown for processing. And from the back seat, Tony, I'm doing the best I can to listen to the police radio, because there's a lot of back and forth communication about the crash, right? And so about 10 minutes into that ride downtown, I could hear what sounded like, and I had to confirm this with the officer. It sounded like that they had just said that somebody else had been pronounced dead at the scene. So I said, "Excuse me, sir." I said, "Did I just hear that correctly? Did they just say that somebody else didn't make it?" And he said, "Unfortunately, yes." So I have 2 dead people. I have another person who is clearly battling life-threatening injuries, who could lose his life. On one hand, right, I'm processing that as best I can in the moment. And I remember as we drove past, because this is 4 blocks from my parents' house, and as we're driving past my parents' street, I remember taking one last glance down the street, because I know that what just happened will keep me from seeing that house for about the next 20 years. I knew that. Mm-hmm. And so that was obviously the worst day of my life, the worst day of many people's lives, and would set me on this trajectory to get me to where I am today.
So that space and time between being in the back of that police car, knowing that you were going to likely be behind bars for, and at that moment, 20 years, which ended up being 17 and a half, to when you finally got sentenced officially, if I recall correct, was that a year?
It was a year later.
Yeah, a year. What was that year like? I mean, you wrote about it a little bit, but I guess more about the emotion of, I mean, I guess I'm not a professional interviewer. I just ask questions, which is like, what does it feel like when you know that you were responsible for taking 2 lives?
Well, it is a heavy burden to bear. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of self-condemnation. There was, you know, we had grown up in the church, and of course I had gotten away from it when I was a teenager and started living, you know, a different life. But, you know, I kind of got back to those spiritual roots, and so I remember I prayed for forgiveness, and I felt genuinely. I was actually in a cell with an older gentleman who was a devout Christian, and so we would read the Bible, and I firmly felt that God had forgiven me for what had happened. A year later at the sentencing, the victim's daughters, 3 of her daughters, had actually testified on the stand at the sentencing that they had forgiven me. So I had their forgiveness as well, but it was still the most difficult thing to come to forgive myself.
Yeah.
And I'll illustrate that, because that comes about 3 or 4 years into my sentence. But I want to back up to explain the pivotal moment. I mean, obviously the crash happening was, you know, the most pivotal moment there could be, but there was a profound thing that happened about 3 or 4 days later as I'm processing this as best I can. And I remember someone had slid our statewide newspaper, the Oregonian. They had slid it underneath my door, and I didn't know why. I was confused, but I figured there must be something important in there for me to read. So I pick up this newspaper and I start to flip through it, and I see my mugshot on the front page of one of the sections. And as I'm reading this column, if you will, with each paragraph that I read that morning, for the first time in several days now, my faceless, even nameless victims at that point had become people. And these people had an incredible story that this writer was detailing. And I learned that these were two people, the two women who had passed away, were 16 and 17 years into their own recovery journeys. They were extremely devoted to helping people get clean and sober, in particular women. They would watch women's children so that ladies could attend AA and NA meetings. They were involved with Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They were volunteers with Volunteers of America. Like they were, in fact, the night that this happened, they were returning home from a clean and sober New Year's Eve party when they were struck and killed by a drunk driver. And I remember the columnist had talked about the palpable irony of that. I had never heard that term, palpable. What does that mean? And I obviously had to look it up, and I read about it, learned about it. And he said that it would be it's a palpable irony that these people who had devoted their lives to help people get clean and sober would have theirs taken by somebody in active addiction. And then he says something that stuck with me forevermore and compels me to do the work that I do today. He said, perhaps the person they will have ended up helping the most is the man who's charged with killing them. And I remember sitting with that profound statement. I didn't know how to quite make sense of it at that time because, again, I'm 4 days removed from the crash. I know that I'm going to go to prison for the next 15 to 20 years. I'm 24 years old. My life is over as far as I'm concerned. But the statement that he made was so compelling that I could not ignore it. So I kind of got back to my spiritual roots and I prayed feverishly for revelation and understanding into that phrase and how I was supposed to apply it to my life. And so for the next several months, maybe 4, 5, 6 months, I meditated on the phrase, I prayed about it, and then it finally was revealed to me, not in the way that I thought. Honestly, I thought it was going to be some vivid supernatural dream that would happen or some booming voice from the heavens that would explain. No, it literally came just like I woke up one day and it was this firm, undeniable conviction that the only way this tragedy will not be in vain is if I carry on these people's legacies. And if I literally make it my life's mission to do everything I can to not just prevent something like this from happening again, but to help those who may be headed down that path, i.e. those struggling in active addiction. And so I made an internal vow in that moment that that's how I was going to spend the rest of my life. I didn't know how that would unfold. I didn't know what shape that would take. I just knew I was dedicated to this cause and this mission. So when you ask what was that year like in between the crash and the sentencing, it was literally me doing a lot of praying and trying to make sense of this phrase, but then also just accepting my reality, which was I was going to be in prison for the next at least 10 years, even and likely more than that, right? Because before you can ever be effective in kind of embracing adversity and allowing it to kind of shape and mold you for the better and to learn some really invaluable life lessons, you first have to accept that this is what it is, right? Now, where do I go from here, right? I can either stay mired in the despair of being removed from society for the next 17 and a half years, and a lot of people do that, frankly, or I could embrace it and say, yes, I am here, but what lessons am I meant to learn through this ordeal, right? What way, what am I supposed to learn about myself, about my worldview, about my thinking, about my distorted thinking, about my addiction? How am I supposed to learn? How can I learn everything I'm supposed to learn that will help me to evolve into the person I'm meant to be, so that when they open this gate, at some point they have to open this gate, I will be ready to live, in the purpose and the God-given purpose, that I was meant to. And so that was my mindset, and really using that time to wrap my brain around that and to accept that so that I could go forth in the mission.
I've got a litany of questions over here.
I'm sure.
No, I am writing away. So a couple things come to mind. I want to, okay. So the last drink you had was, if I'm assuming correctly, was
Yep.
the end of 2003, New Year's Eve 2003, going into
Yep.
2004. So 21 years almost, 22,
20, yeah, well, coming up on 22.
22 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to ask this because I'm sober too. Actually, I wore this shirt. I had these shirts made.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, cool kids
Look
don't
at
drink. I have
that.
another one that says cool kids don't do drugs, because
Oh,
alcohol
I
is a
gotta
drug.
find one. I gotta get one of those.
Yeah, it's on my website. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, they're unisex, y'all. So if you want to get, but I love. I mean, like I'm so proud of the fact that I don't put drugs in my body, and I also like to point out alcohol is a drug, but
Right.
society still separates them out. But I'm working on that one Instagram post at a time.
Yes.
So I want to hear about what it was like for you, because you getting sober was much different than me becoming alcohol free, sober, whatever. So because when you don't have access to it, it's like, was that different for you then? Because you're like, I'm not doing this anymore, so I'm done. Or what was that like?
Yeah, so obviously I was forced into
Hmm.
sobriety. Well, to an extent, I'll say to an extent, there were certainly opportunities. Once you get to state prison, there are opportunities to drink.
Oh,
Yeah, guys make what they call pruno or jailhouse, hooch.
uh,
But they make it, and I've seen guys drink it and act as belligerently drunk as people do out here once they've been drinking. And so there were opportunities, but frankly, I mean, there was no part of me that was tempted or enticed by that. I mean, once I set out on this mission, like I was fully locked in, and that's really what allowed me to not think about how much time I had and to, have that get me down. I was really just, energized and motivated to get in my education. I had a GED at the time. Went through my education in sociology and psychology, and I really, learned from both a macro and a micro vantage point, as to why I went the way that I did and why I thought the way that I did as a teenager and why I struggled with these different psychosocial development issues. And then I was able to use that to kind of pour into other guys in the system, young guys coming into the system. Obviously the gangs want to recruit them and things like that. And they would see how I would do my time and that I was helping guys with their GEDs and I was going to college, taking college classes myself and not getting into trouble. And that was appealing to some of them. So they would seek me out on the yard. They would come and talk to me. And eventually they would confide in me, about things that happened to them, like, when they were kids and like things you just don't talk about you don't talk about generally, but let alone in prison, right? About being molested and dealing with trauma and things like that. But they trusted me and I gained that trust, just with everybody, frankly. And so that's what allowed me to really just stay focused and motivated and excited, frankly, about this work, and to avoid the prison drama and the pitfalls that guys find themselves in, that can make prison more difficult than it already is. And having the support of my family, my wonderful family, and my amazing partner, and I mean, like I say, it takes a village, right? And I didn't have the success I had just because I'm special. It's because I had people on the outside, taking care of me and looking out for me and encouraging me and inspiring me and loving me and all of those wonderful things. And I'm sorry I forgot the original question. I don't know how I went down that tangent, but
it's okay. It
this is where we are.
No, it was good. Did you have you answered it. Did you have an identity, like the identity piece we talked about earlier with, like, I'm hanging out with white people and then I'm hanging out with black people and I don't know who I am. And did you feel that in jail too? Or what was that like? Were there more black people than white people? Or, I mean, they're not just black and white, obviously there's brown, there's all kinds.
Sure.
But
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, Oregon is just pretty much a hodgepodge of all different
Mhm.
races and backgrounds and things like that. So I'll say that because I had never established a firm identity, because I never frankly really knew who Martin was, right, as an adolescent. I was whoever people wanted Martin or needed Martin to be, right? But I never really got to spend time with myself. So, like, I'll say, like, the good thing that came out of prison was that it got me away from all the distractions, from all the people, from all the influences, from the alcohol, the drugs, the women, all of those things, and just allowed me to spend time with myself. Now, I would not recommend that people, as a way to kind of, engage in some introspection to go to prison for 17.5 years. But if you're going to be there, that's not a bad thing. So I was able to really spend time with myself and understand who I am and what my values are and what I believe and what motivates me. But then once I really set on this mission, it gave me a clear sense of direction as to how I was supposed to live my life. And so when I started working with guys and pouring into guys and having that in turn validate me, right? Because before, when I was in my addiction, it was all about these superficial things. Let me get the car, let me get the girls, let me get the clothes, let me get the money, and then I'll feel important, right? Gimme, gimme, gimme. And I learned that through recovery and through service work, like, no, it's actually the opposite, right? When you give of yourself to humanity, you pour into other people, that in turn naturally, intrinsically validates you and gives you a sense of purpose and that you're doing a great thing. And that's what makes you feel good, right? That's what makes you feel important, and that you're showing up and showing up in the world, into the world the way that you need to. And so so once I discovered that, right, then that helped to shape my identity as somebody who is of service to other people, as somebody who shows up, with the listening ear and just offering comfort even in silence when people need it, and just offering good to humanity, because God knows that, man, I took a lot from humanity growing up. I took a lot from my neighborhood. I took a lot from my family. I put them through hell. They did the best they could, and this is how I repay them. Like, so I had to, do the best I could. I joined AA in 2016, so I still had like 5.5 years left. Started doing AA, worked the steps, got a sponsor. But the amends making process, like, I really, and I had already started to embark on that by the vow that I made and the work that I was doing, but like really, embracing that and really trying to live my life in that way. And so even the work that I do today in my community in Portland, is kind of my lifelong amends making process. And so, yeah, once I accepted this mission and then it started to take shape, then that's what really firmed up my identity, and one that I'm very, very proud of. And then as far as like my blackness, like, I wouldn't want to be anybody else today.
Right.
But that part mainly came through my collegiate studies, where I was taking African American courses and learning, because in school we learned about slavery, we learned about Rosa Parks and Dr. King, right? And that was pretty much the extent, right? But they don't teach you about all the great inventors and scientists and just the civilizations we had before slavery, right, over in Africa, and just all these incredible feats that Black folks had achieved throughout the years, and that really gave me a sense of pride in my Blackness, right? And so merging the two, really solidified a healthy identity, and led me on my way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so powerful because it's not like, and even think like at 24 years old, like our brains aren't even fully developed. But we didn't,
Right.
I don't know about you, but that stuff wasn't talked about like when we were coming of age. I didn't know that I thought my brain was fully developed. I don't know by the time I was 13. I don't,
Exactly.
and I was not smart back then. Listen, I was doing some dumb shit too. So yeah, but it's 25. So you just think about that. Like, of course we're struggling with these things and self-worth and self-value and, how we handle things and making poor decisions and learning from them. Because,
Right.
who would have thought ever, and you probably didn't think this back in 2004 when all this really went down, which is this is going to ruin my life. But look at it now. And it probably felt, and I even wrote this in some way, like 17 and a half years is like a lifetime. I'm going to be old when I get out, which by my math, you were not even 42 yet.
I just turned 42 2 months prior to release. So yeah.
But you at the time, you thought 42, God, I'm going to be old.
Yeah, there's no life post 40 as far as I was concerned. Like, yeah, that hard, couldn't even fathom that. And
Right.
so,
Right.
but I, I would like to come back to this,
Yeah.
because I think this is a really important point. I said I was going to talk about it a little bit later when you talked about just grappling with the fact that I was responsible for two human beings no longer being here. So this took about 3 or 4 years for me to get to a place where I could forgive myself.
Mhm.
And So what that looked like is for 11 months out of the year, I was all about the mission and helping guys and learning about addiction and things like that. Going out to the yard, I had a great self-care plan, working out, lifting weights, jogging, everything was good. And then the month of December was absolute torture. Like I would place myself in a prison within a prison. Mentally, I would force myself for all 31 days to relive every event of that day leading into the fatal crash. Because in a weird, twisted way, I felt that was my way of honoring my victims by not allowing myself to forget what happened, right?
Mm.
As though I could ever forget what happened. And it was torturous. And so I was depressed, I was self-loathing, I didn't get off my bunk much. So it was a really hard time. And I did that for the first 3 or 4 Decembers. And then I realized, and I think this was maybe my higher power just like bopping me over the head and saying, "What are you doing?" But I realized that I was actually dishonoring what I said I was going to do. I told my victims' family members I was going to pour everything I had into this mission. And I was doing that for 11 months out of the year, but not 12. And so when I realized that I was actually doing the opposite of what I said I was going to do, then I threw off the shackles, the bondage of shame, right? Because that's really what it was. It wasn't guilt. And people use guilt and shame interchangeably as though they're the same, and they're really not.
No,
They're,
no.
they're distinct. And so, guilt, I say, is a healthy behavioral correction mechanism that when you do something, you feel badly about it. That's your conscience saying, "Don't do this again." You self-correct. That's a good thing. We need people to feel guilty about things. When that guilt persists and it morphs into shame, that's something much different. That is this overarching dark cloud that follows you, that assassinates your character, your worthiness as a human being, tells you you're no good, you're unlovable, you're unforgivable, you're unworthy. Like there's no good that can come from shame. And I realized that that's what I was doing to myself. And so I freed myself from that, and I allowed myself to fully throw myself into this mission. And then I allowed the work that I committed to doing and that I do, I allowed that to be enough for me to be okay with looking myself in the mirror and not feeling this sense of shame or not forgiving myself or self-condemnation. And so I hope that anybody who might be listening who's struggling with learning to coming to forgive themselves, that they distinguish between the two and embrace the guilt and shed the shame.
Yeah, shame. Brene Brown obviously does a lot of work on shame. I'm sure you've read
Mm-hmm.
a lot of her work. And essentially, if you were to boil it down, the way to shrink, that's hard to say, shrink shame is to shed light on it.
That's right.
And the more we talk about it, the more it slowly over time, it's not a light switch, it's a seed. It takes time to go
Right.
away. And that's why I decided to just be out loud about quitting drinking. I was just going to refuse to feel the shame. I opened my book with my arrest. And so I was in jail for all of 18 hours. But I tell you what, Martin, those were long 18 hours. So
It'll change you.
I'm like, and when you read the opening of my book, I mean, it's hard, even to this day, it's hard, but it's true. And I never thought the thing I was most ashamed of, I'd end up being the most proud of. And I think about your story too, like, and I don't know if you've thought about it this way, but it's possible that by you sharing your story as openly as you have on podcasts and books and everything you've done, that you've saved so many lives.
I like to think so. Part of my work today, having been out 4 years now, and I talked about it, I do travel the country. A lot of high schools will bring me in before prom and graduation season when we know kids, get a little loose and tend to drink and drive more. I'll be at a college. There's Collegiate Alcohol Awareness Month, Awareness Week. In about 3 weeks, I'll be at Penn State doing a presentation, but I speak remotely at about 10 or 11 DUI victim impact panels every month. And these are people who have been convicted or been ticketed for driving impaired. So they at least have one DUI, some are multiple offenders. Mm-hmm. And so I share my story with them. And a lot of them come in and they'll say, I came into this thing because they're mandated to be there by the court, right? Nobody wants to be there, especially if it's on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. and they say, oh, I kind of came into this thing thinking, I wasn't going to learn anything. I just had to be here and I'll get through it and get the certificate. And they said, when you shared your story, like it really woke me up, and it really resonated with me, because that could have easily been me, right? As you stated yourself.
Yeah.
And so I like to think that I've given, especially those who are or have been prone to drinking and driving, giving them something to think about. And I don't encourage them just to not drink and drive themselves, but if they're around someone who has been drinking and they know that they should not be driving, I tell them it's your responsibility to ensure that they don't. And I don't care if you have to wrestle them to the ground and take their keys. That's what you have to do. They will thank you in the morning once they've sobered up, trust me. But you do not want to be responsible for allowing that person to leave and something tragic happens, and now you have to think about what you could have done to stop them.
Yeah.
So take action.
Yeah, and I'm not certainly not proud of it, that I drank and drove. But then I'm like, and I'm not justifying it by this statement, but a lot of people do it, and that gets me into this whole thing with big alcohol and like why this stuff is legal is beyond me. When you really study it and understand
Sure.
it, but what's funny is people ask me when I talk about my arrest, they're like, "Oh, you got a DUI," and I'm like, "No, I wasn't drinking and driving when I got arrested. I was just being a drunk asshole." I'll leave it. I'll let that when my book comes out, people can read it. But it was
Looking forward to it.
it was bad. So what do you tell people? Like, and you said I guess, what is your opinion now, or how do you say it? I know you share your story, but like about drinking and driving, are you like just don't do it, or where do you stand, I guess?
Yeah. So when I speak at these panels, I tell people, like, I'm not here to tell you that because you have a DUI, you should never drink again, right? That's the choice you have to make. Like, if you have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, then you need to assess that for yourself and be honest about it. And if you do have a problem, then I would recommend you seek help, and I can help you with that. I can find resources, because that's what I do as well.
Right.
But I'm not here to tell you to never drink. What I am saying is what you do behind closed doors is your business. The minute you bring it out into the streets by getting into a vehicle and driving on the roads, you've made it everybody else's business. And that's what we're here to prevent, right? People don't deserve to have you make a choice that's going to affect the rest of their life and their family's lives, right? That is not fair to them, right? The choices that I made, left a man disabled for the rest of his life and took two amazing, beautiful people from this earth and their families, a lifetime of heartache that they didn't ask for, right? And they didn't deserve, because I made poor choices. And so I just tell people, listen, if you know you're going to be out drinking or think that you might, just make sure you have a solid plan in place for how you're going to get home safely before you do so. Whether it be schedule an Uber or a Lyft ride, or have a sober friend or family member come and pick you up, like sleep it off at a friend's house, like whatever you need to just have that plan in place before you start drinking, because once you start drinking, your judgment is the first thing that goes, right? Like you are not in the best mind state to start making sound decisions. So have the plan in place beforehand and then go have a good time. Yeah. But just do so responsibly. That's my message.
Yeah. Yeah. That prefrontal cortex goes offline, and
absolutely.
And that's your CPU. And alcohol, in case people aren't aware, is, it's ethanol. It's like drinking gasoline. It's just watered down with a bunch of other stuff so we can ingest it. It is not good for any part of your body, your brain, your organs, anything. So it's essentially, we're talking about risk. You're taking a risk by just drinking in general. And then you layer on exactly what you're talking about, because that's a different level of risk if you get in a car or you don't have your stuff all planned out. So, yes, and yes, because
you're right. Absolutely right.
I try to be, as I've gotten further along in my own relationship with alcohol and helping individuals and coaching clients and all these things, I really just hate it more and more and more. And that, that's my opinion and whatever. It's just, I don't see the upside. I really don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I let people know, because I'm also, a clinician. I work with folks privately as well. And I let them know, like, if they're, as they're thinking about their relationship with alcohol and, do they have, because I thought I had control over my alcohol use for me, but also a part of me also knew that that I did have a problem, right? But
Mhm.
I tell them like your addicted brain, which is that very primitive part of the brain, not the prefrontal cortex, but the limbic
Yep.
system, that part of the brain where addiction lies will do everything it can to try to convince you that you're okay, right? It will convince you that, oh, like for me, it was like, oh, well, I'm not this guy under a bridge with a brown paper bag, right? So he's the alcoholic, right?
Mhm.
I'm working a job, paying bills, and
Mhm.
not living at home, and like there's many things I can point to delude me into thinking that I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, right? Because my thinking is one thing, but the facts don't lie, right? They're pretty stubborn. And if I get honest about the facts, right? The facts say, because even 21 plus years later, my addicted brain will try to convince me that I'm not that same kid. Maybe I can't have a drink or two socially and be fine. And, I wouldn't go off the rails like I did back then. But the facts say the last time you drank, two people wound up dead, another person injured, and you went to prison for 17 and a half years. Those are the facts.
Yeah.
So I don't care what you want to think about this or this or that. Those are the facts. So for me, now granted, that's not going to be everybody's facts, right? So I say consider it this way. Certainly every time you drink, bad things don't happen. But when most bad things did happen in your life, were you intoxicated?
Mm-hmm.
And if you were, that's a problem.
100%.
That's a problem.
100%. Not to make light of it, and I certainly am not, but I watch a lot of true crime, and most of these like murders and all this shit that happens, alcohol's involved.
True. Yeah.
Like people are doing crazy stuff because they're out of their mind, boozing.
Well, it lowers your inhibitions first and foremost, right? It gives you this false sense of confidence and of even arrogance, right? That I can get away, I can do this and get away with it, but really it lowers the inhibitions, right?
Yeah.
So the part of your brain, as you talked about, right, that prefrontal cortex, that allows you to have logical thinking and thinking about the future and consequences, like that part is offline, right? You are not assessing the potential consequences as you would if you were sober, right? You are not afraid of danger, right? You're less likely to be afraid of danger when you're impaired versus not. And so again, knowing these things, just it comes to drinking and driving, just know how you're going to get home safely.
Yeah.
Before you go out and start drinking. Once you have that solid plan locked in, do what you do, but
Yeah.
just keep it in a safe zone.
Yeah. I agree. All right, I got three more questions.
Okay.
The women in your life, and you wrote about this, but I want to talk about this. So, talk to me about the women who have shaped you into the Martin that's in front of me today.
Yeah, hands down, you read about my partner Renee,
Mm-hmm.
who is, just everything. This woman came into my life a year and a half into my sentence. Frankly, believed in me before I believed in myself. Still hadn't established that firm identity yet, or self confidence, and she just saw something in me. Met through a pen pal website. Wasn't looking for a relationship, anything like that. We're just friends, and then things developed, and she just really, encouraged me. But then, did all the behind the scenes work as far as researching how I could get a college degree and what would that process look like, and made the contacts with the different colleges and ordering transcript, like all the stuff, right? Even the book, right? I literally wrote out my book, wrote out my chapters, sent them in an envelope to her. She sat in front of her computer, somehow made out my chicken scratch handwriting, typed everything out, edited, just everything, right? Rock solid in my corner for the next 16 years. And, has just been, just an absolute angel. And so it's been over 4 years now. So we live together, and, just an angel masquerading as a human being. And then my mother, Maria, who passed away, God rest her soul, passed away when she was tender age of 51. I was only a couple years into my sentence, but I was very much a mama's boy.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember 15 years old having adult conversations with my mom while drinking coffee. And so I think, the reason why I feel that I'm pretty, emotionally developed and intelligent in that way is because she helped to shape that, and she really nurtured that. And I cherish my mom, and I miss her, and I love her. And you know, I remember there's something she told me that I carried with me as I was struggling with my confidence, but building it nonetheless. And I remember I would harken back to something she said when I was younger, and I know many people hear it, but she told me, she said, Martin, anything you are seriously set on doing, you're going to be successful. She said, you're just one of those people. You will be successful when you really want to do something. You're going to be successful. And so I took that with me as I was going through this process of incarceration and you know, forming an identity. And when Renee would, you know, convince me to write a book or to pursue a master, like I was totally fine with getting a bachelor's degree. And, you know, Renee was like, well, why not go for the master's? I'm like, that's a freaking graduate degree. Like, can I do that? Martin, trust me, you're smart. You can do it. Look what you've done. And then I would also hear my mother say, anything you are serious about doing, you're going to be successful. So those two are, you know, 90% responsible for who I am today and why I live my life the way that I do.
Yeah. Now, this next question, I don't know if you've been asked this question, and I feel like I've been framing a lot of my questions like this, but I don't. So, what would 46-year-old Martin tell 24-year-old Martin?
Oh man, I would have definitely told him to not put so much, you know, emphasis on what other people, you know, thought about him, and to, you know, really, you know, hone in on himself, and you know, to you know, follow his dreams. Like I want to become an architect, go to college, become an architect one day, and I wish I would have told myself to, you know, to be comfortable in that space, and that it would pay off in the long run, and that if not, you know, pursuing what other people wanted you to do, and you know, the person they wanted you to be is going to lead to very severe consequences, and please don't go down that path. To, you know, spend more time with family and those who have loved you and supported you throughout the years, as opposed to taking to the streets and, you know, really dishonoring the way that they raised you. You know, because that's something you will think about when you're 46 and 56 and 66 if you're still here. And you know, you know, just to be true to oneself, and to walk confidently in that. That would have been my message to myself.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting when you think about it? Like, I think about 24-year-old Tony. I barely remember her. But boy, I'd like to meet her. I would.
Yeah,
'Cause I'd tell her it'd be okay. Like, just, it'll be okay. What, you know, because we all have our ups and downs, but not to worry so damn much. So,
that's a fact. And I would have told myself, alcohol is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Like,
yes.
it is not is not your friend. It will get you in a lot of trouble, irreversible trouble. So
Yes.
get it now.
Yeah, and my kids are 23, 21, and 19, and you know, yeah, they know, but it doesn't mean they
Good,
listen to me, Martin. I'm telling you.
good. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, Martin, if people want to learn more about you, buy your book, book you for speaking, where can they find you?
I say the easiest place is at my website, at martinlockett.com. I also, as I mentioned, do have a social media. I'm only on one social media platform, which is Instagram, and so that's at Martin L. Lockett.
Mhm.
But yeah, either of those would be easiest way to find me.
Yeah, that's awesome. This was such a great conversation. I think we just could keep going. Uh,
We could.
we could. I just know it. So thank you for taking the time, connecting with me, sharing your story with everyone, not just on this podcast, but the work you're doing. I can't wait to continue to cheer you on and sing your praises and recommend your book. I can't recommend it enough, everyone. If you have not, like, it's so good. And you will walk away regardless of your relationship with alcohol, you will walk away a changed person in a positive way. So thank you for being brave and doing that. And I really, I don't say it often because I like to be authentic, but I'm very impressed. So
Thank you deeply. This was a phenomenal conversation. You asked some great questions, and it just felt like a conversation. I appreciate you allowing me to be comfortable to talk about things that are, really difficult to talk about. And hopefully the message, will resonate with folks listening. And it was an honor to be here with you today.
Thank you. And if you're ever in Michigan, you come to a Kalamazoo Wings hockey game.
I will definitely put that on my bucket list for sure.
You and Renee come, and we'll show you. I'll show you the whole thing. So
That'd be awesome.
Awesome. All right. I am not hard to find. If you're looking to connect with me, the hockey side of my life is at kwings.com. And then everything related to my TEDx, my coaching, the book, my conference, Empower Her, whatever else, everyone, I'm working on something, is at tonywill.com. And then I am on 3 social platforms, Facebook and LinkedIn at Tony Lentini Will, and then Instagram at I'm Tony Will. And until next time.